Millions of dollars in the bank could not heal Shaquille O'Neal's worn-out knee. At 3:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in Philadelphia, Shaq drove himself to a rundown bike shop in a poor neighborhood. He just wanted a bike big enough for his physical therapy, but no store had a bike for a man of his giant size. Inside, he met a 55-year-old mechanic with failing eyesight. The man was struggling to pay a $14,200 medical debt. There was no money or fame between them. They were just two tired souls connecting over an impossible job, but with pressure from a bossy landlord. Will this shop have to close? And why did a bike that took 3 hours to build cost only $47? It was 6 in the morning. The big house was still and quiet. You could hear his footsteps before you ever saw him. A man who weighed 147 kilos walked slow across the wood floor. Every step sounded heavy, careful, like he was used to moving slowly through his own home. Shaq lowered himself onto a thick oak chair. Someone had built it stronger just to hold his weight. He leaned his huge back forward. He grabbed his left shoe, a size 23, and pulled it on with a grunt. His knee popped with a dry, ugly sound. It was a sound he knew well by now. That sound came from over 28,000 points scored in his playing days. The body remembers every single one of them. He sat there for a second, just breathing. The morning sun hadn't even come up yet. He looked across the room at a tall glass case. For NBA championship rings sat inside, catching a small beam of light. They used to mean everything. Crowds, cameras. His name shouted from every direction. Right now, in this quiet room, alone, they meant almost nothing at all. His hand trembled slightly as he opened a small jar. He scooped out some hot pain cream. He rubbed it slow into his swollen knee, wincing a little at the heat and the soreness underneath. A giant man, alone in a giant house. The lights from his playing days had gone out a long time ago. Outside, the world was just waking up. Inside, Shaq sat with his own quiet pain, like he did most mornings now. He pushed himself up slowly and walked toward the tall kitchen window, looking out at his quiet backyard pool. No parties tonight. No cameras waiting outside the gate. Just silence and the slow drip of his coffee maker. He remembered locker rooms full of noise, teammates laughing, fans chanting his name through thick stadium walls. Now the loudest sound in his house most mornings was the creak of his own knee. He poured a cup of black coffee and sat down at the long kitchen table, alone. Sarah would be arriving soon. With his schedule for the day full of meetings, that didn't matter much anymore. He flexed his knee slowly under the table, testing how stiff it felt this morning. It felt worse than yesterday. A small voice in his head warned this couldn't go on much longer. He thought about all the doctors he'd already seen, all the creams and braces and ice packs piled in his closet. None of it had really worked, not for long anyway. The pain always crept back within a few days. His trainer kept suggesting new stretches, new machines, new supplements that promised results they never quite delivered. He finished his coffee slowly, staring at his own reflection in the dark window glass. The man staring back looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He thought, not for the first time, that fame had a strange way of making a person feel invisible. Crowds used to chant his name. Now, most days, the only voice he heard was his own. Later that week, Shaq sat in a small doctor's office in New York City. The visit cost him $450. Dr. Timothy clipped an X-ray onto a lighted board. He studied it closely, frowning at what he saw. Your knee cartilage is thinning out fast, the doctor said, tapping the image with his pen. If you don't start riding a bike just 45 minutes a day to keep that joint moving, you'll need a third surgery. Shaq sat quietly, listening. He had already had 2 surgeries. He didn't want a third one. How bad are we talking, Doc? He asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Bad enough that I'd start now, not next month, Dr. Timothy said, setting down his pen. Riding a regular bike isn't easy for someone your size, the doctor added. But you need something. Soon. Swimming would help too, but you told me last time you hate pools, the doctor said, half smiling. Shaq let out a short laugh. Pools are for relaxing, not for work. Shaq nodded slowly. He understood the warning, even if he didn't like hearing it. He needed a bike. Not just any bike. One strong enough to hold a man his size, day after day. He asked his assistant, Sarah, to start looking. They visited 3 high-end bike shops across Manhattan that same week. At the first shop, a salesman rolled out a sleek black bike, priced at $8,000. Shaq tried sitting on it carefully. The thin carbon frame bent slightly under his weight, creaking in protest. His knees pushed up almost to his chest. The whole thing looked painful just to watch. The salesman in his sharp gray suit just shook his head slowly. He didn't even try to sell it anymore. At the second shop, they brought out 3 different models. None of them came close to fitting him. One employee even pulled out a measuring tape, comparing numbers, shaking his head the entire time. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "We just don't have anything built for a frame this size." At the third shop, an older employee just laughed nervously and said, "We don't build bikes for guys like you, sir." He said it kindly enough, but it still stung a little, hearing it said out loud like that. Shaq didn't say much. He just thanked them quietly and walked back out to the car each time. In the car, he stared out the window, watching the city blur past, saying nothing for several blocks. That night, Sarah sat in her small apartment, scrolling through her phone, tired and a little frustrated. She typed in different searches. Heavy-duty bike frames, custom steel bikes, big and tall bicycle shops. Most results led nowhere, just expensive showrooms in other cities that wouldn't ship in time. Eventually, she found an old mechanics forum, almost forgotten, buried deep in search results from years ago. One name kept popping up again and again in the old comments. A shop called Vance's Spoke and Chain. People wrote things like, "Old Gabe can build anything out of steel," and "best framework on the East Coast." It sat on the edge of Philadelphia, far from any fancy shopping street. It wasn't famous. It wasn't fancy. But it might be the only place left that could actually help him. She bookmarked the page and decided she'd bring it up first thing in the morning. It felt like a long shot. But long shots were better than no shots at all. The next morning, Sarah showed Shaq the page on her phone. He stared at it for a long moment. "Worth a shot," he said finally, grabbing his jacket off the chair. "It's pretty far from here," Sarah warned. "Not exactly the kind of neighborhood you usually visit." Neither was Newark, back in the day, Shaq said, heading for the door. "Let's go." The black SUV rolled slowly down Front Street, deep in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. Shaq looked out, through the tinted window at red brick walls, darkened with years of soot and city grime. A train rattled loudly overhead on rusted tracks, shaking the windows of nearby buildings. Workers walked along the cracked sidewalk, carrying lunch bags, hard hats, and tired, sunburned faces. A small corner store on the block had hand-painted letters on its window, half peeled away by years of weather. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked at the passing train, again and again, without much luck. This wasn't his usual world. No marble floors here. No glass towers. Just old brick and hard work. Shaq hesitated, his hand resting on the door handle. He didn't move to open it. Getting out of this car meant people would stare. They always stared, no matter where he went. They'd stare at his size first. Then they'd notice the way he favored his left leg, walking slow and careful. And what if this rundown little shop couldn't help him either? What if this trip was just another waste? "Turn the car around," he told Sarah quietly. "There's nothing for me down here." Sarah glanced at him in the mirror, but said nothing. She reached for the gear shift. Just then, a sharp pain shot through his knee as he shifted his weight in the seat. He froze, gripping the door handle tighter, waiting for the pain to settle back down. Pride was telling him to leave this place behind. His aching body was telling him something very different. For a second, his mind drifted back to Newark, to cracked sidewalks, and his mother Lucille's tired voice. She used to say pride never paid a single bill, no matter how good it felt to hold on to it. He sat there a moment longer, just breathing slow, staring at the old brick building outside. Then, without another word, he opened the car door and stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. Shaq had to bend his head low just to fit through the shop's crooked, narrow wooden door. Inside, the air smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and rusted metal that had sat for years. Tools of every kind hung from nails on the walls, wrenches, chains, old bent wheels stacked in a corner. A radio played soft, scratchy music near the back of the shop, barely loud enough to hear. Old calendars from years past still hung crooked on the walls, their pages long out of date. A faded photograph sat taped near the register, showing a younger Gabe standing beside a finished racing bike. A man stood hunched over a wheel stand near the rear wall. He didn't look up right away. This was Gabe Vance, 55 years old, wearing thick, scratched glasses that slid down his nose. An accident at a steel mill, 8 years earlier, had cost him 40% of his eyesight. Gabe finally lifted his head, squinting hard through the dim shop light at the giant in his doorway. He didn't gasp. He didn't reach for a pen to ask for an autograph. He didn't even say the name Shaq out loud, like most people would right away. He just looked down slowly at the size 23 shoes standing near his workbench. "You've got some heavy bones on you," Gabe said, his voice rough, with a thick Pennsylvania accent. "You need a bike for riding around town? Or for healing up something?" he added, wiping his hands on a rag. Something about that question landed different. No one had ever asked it quite that plain, that honest. "For healing," Shaq said simply. "Doctor's orders. Knee's pretty much done for." Gabe nodded once, like that answer made perfect sense to him. No pity in his face. No shock either. "Most folks come in here wanting something fast and shiny," Gabe said, wiping grease off an old wrench. "You want something that actually works. That's a different kind of customer." "Story of my life," Shaq said, a small, tired smile crossing his face for the first time that day. He wasn't impressed by fame or money. He just saw a tired man who needed real help. That simple respect made something in Shaq's chest loosen, just a little, for the first time in weeks. Gabe cleared off an old wooden stool sitting near his workbench, brushing away metal shavings with his sleeve. He placed a thick steel plate carefully on top of the seat before stepping back. "Sit," Gabe said, pointing with a greasy finger. "That'll hold you steady. Easier on the knee than standing." Shaq sat down slowly, testing his weight bit by bit. The stool held firm without even a creak. Gabe shuffled toward a messy pile of old parts stacked in the back corner of the shop. He dug through rusted gears and bent rims until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out 3 thick steel tubes, clearly taken from an old tandem bike, the kind built for 2 riders. "These came off a Swiss tandem, built back in the 60s, Gabe explained, running his fingers along the metal. "Modern steel is light, sure, but it's weak. Snaps easy under real pressure," he said, tapping the old tubes. "This old stuff right here, high carbon content, it'll hold a man pushing 150 kilos without even flinching. My grandfather used tubes just like these to build farm bikes back in the 50s, Gabe added, almost to himself. "This shop's been standing on this corner since before I was even born," he said, glancing toward the front window. "They don't make steel with this much patience in it anymore." Shaq nodded slowly, watching the old man's careful hands move across the steel like he'd done this 1,000 times. He decided right then to trust this whole strange process, even if it took the rest of the day. He pulled out his phone and quietly canceled every meeting left on his afternoon schedule. Sarah, sitting outside in the car, just shrugged when he told her. She'd seen him do stranger things. He wanted to stay and watch this old, tired bike frame slowly come back to life. Something about Gabe's steady hands made Shaq believe in him, even with those clouded, half-working eyes. Gabe grabbed a long steel tape measure from a hook on the wall, ready to size up the frame. He knelt down carefully beside Shaq's leg, squinting hard to read the small numbers on the tape. His eyes strained in the dim light of the shop. Suddenly, the metal tape slipped from his fingers. Shaq's hand shot out fast, catching it just before it clattered to the concrete floor. "Quick hands," Gabe muttered, almost smiling, before going right back to work, without missing a beat. They moved together, after that, finding a rhythm, without needing very many words between them. Shaq held the long, hot steel tube steady, with his huge hands, while Gabe lined up his handsaw. Sparks and metal dust drifted through the air as Gabe made slow, careful cuts along the marked lines. They worked like 2 men who had built bikes together for years, not 2 strangers who'd just met. Gabe hummed quietly along, with the scratchy radio music, his focus locked completely on the steel in front of him. Shaq found himself relaxing into the rhythm of it, the simple, steady work feeling almost like therapy itself. For a little while, he wasn't a famous retired athlete. He was just a man helping another man finish a job. Then the front door creaked open hard, letting in a blast of cold afternoon air. A man stepped inside wearing a long, expensive black coat that looked completely out of place. This was Marcus Croft, representing a company called Croft and Associates Property Management. His shoes were polished to a shine, and he stepped carefully around every oil stain on the floor. Croft didn't raise his voice at all. His tone stayed calm, smooth, almost friendly on the surface. He pulled a blue envelope from his coat pocket and set it gently on the workbench. "Mr. Vance," he said, folding his hands in front of him. "Starting next month, this whole block becomes luxury apartments. Your rent here goes from $950 a month up to $1,710, Croft continued, like he was reading off a grocery list. "If you can't make that payment by the 5th, we're required to take this space back. It's all written clearly in Section 4 of your original lease agreement," he added, tapping the envelope twice. Gabe's jaw tightened, just slightly, but his hands kept working on the wheel in front of him. "This block's been here longer than your company," Gabe said quietly, not looking up. Croft smiled thin and cold. "Progress doesn't wait for sentiment, Mr. Vance. You know that better than most." Gabe didn't argue further. He didn't even raise his eyes to meet Croft's. He simply slid the envelope into a drawer beneath his toolbox, closing it slowly. Croft glanced once around the shop, his nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of oil and metal. His eyes landed briefly on Shaq, then moved away, like he hadn't even registered who was sitting there. Then he turned and walked back out the door, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the pavement outside. After Croft left, the whole shop seemed to feel heavier, quieter, like the air itself had gone still. Gabe tried to hide the slight shaking in his hands as he reached for his welding torch. Shaq noticed a stack of papers sitting in the back corner, half hidden behind an old toolbox. They were medical bills from Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, the edges curled and yellowed with age. Some of the pages had red stamps marked "Final Notice" across the top in bold letters. One number stood out clearly in bright red ink across the top page: $14,217.83. Shaq stared at it for a long moment, understanding settling slowly into his chest. This shop wasn't just where Gabe worked every day. It was the only thing keeping him standing at all. Shaq thought about his own closets full of shoes worth more than this old man's monthly rent. The thought sat heavy in his stomach, uncomfortable, hard to shake off. He thought about all the money sitting in accounts he barely checked anymore, untouched for months at a time. Meanwhile, one man down the street couldn't even cover a single hospital bill without losing sleep over it. Neither man said a single word about it. The silence between them said more than any sentence could. Gabe finally broke the quiet, clearing his throat roughly. "Let's get this frame welded before we lose the light." The hardest part of the whole build came next, the part that couldn't afford a single mistake. Welding the V-shaped support underneath the center of the frame, the spot that would carry all the weight. This weld had to be perfect, clean, and strong all the way through. Too weak, and the entire frame could snap apart under Shaq's full weight while riding. Gabe wiped his glasses on his shirt, blinking hard, trying to clear the haze creeping into his sight. "You good?" Shaq asked quietly, watching him closely. "I'm fine," Gabe muttered, though his voice carried less certainty than his words. Gabe pulled his welding mask down low and clicked on the bright blue flame of his torch. His eyes blurred suddenly behind the dark glass, dark spots floating and swimming across his vision. His hand started to shake just slightly, the flame wandering off the careful line he'd marked. Shaq didn't panic or pull away. He moved fast but stayed completely calm. He gently placed his huge hand right over Gabe's wrist, holding the trembling arm steady and still. "I got you," Shaq said quietly. "Just breathe. I'll keep it steady." For a moment, Shaq became Gabe's second pair of eyes, calm, patient, and perfectly unmoving. Together, guided by feel and trust more than sight, they finished the weld in careful silence. It came out clean, strong, exactly the way it needed to be. The frame was saved, just in time. Gabe lifted his mask, breathing hard, and looked at the weld closely under the shop light. "That'll hold," he said simply, nodding once with quiet relief. He set down his torch and rubbed his eyes hard with the back of his glove. "Used to never have trouble like that," he muttered, almost to himself. "Eyes are getting worse every year." Shaq didn't say anything right away. He just clapped a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. By 6:45 that evening, the bike sat finished on its stand, ready for one final test. It had no shiny paint job, no fancy brand name printed anywhere on the frame. Just rough gray steel, thick off-road tires, and a heavy-duty chain pulled from an old farm machine. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong, built exactly for the man who needed it. Shaq rolled the bike carefully out onto the sidewalk along Front Street, the evening air cool against his face. He climbed on slowly, testing the seat, the handlebars, the way the frame settled under his weight. He pushed down on the pedal for the very first time, holding his breath, without realizing it. It felt smooth, steady, like nothing he had ever ridden before in his entire life. His knee didn't hurt at all under the pressure. The frame held his body like a small steel fortress. He rode in a slow circle on the empty street, a small, surprised smile spreading across his face. The evening air felt cool against his skin, the streetlights starting to flicker on one by one above him. For a few minutes, he forgot about cameras, contracts, and everything waiting for him back home. It was just him, an old steel bike, and a quiet street in a neighborhood nobody talked about. When he rolled back, he asked Gabe what he owed for all the work and parts. Gabe handed him a small, handwritten receipt. Just $47. $35 for the new chain and center axle. Shaq blinked at the number, sure there had to be some kind of mistake. "That's it? After all that work?" he asked, pulling out a thick stack of cash from his jacket. Gabe waved off the money with one greasy hand, shaking his head firmly. "I don't charge a man for solving a good mechanical puzzle," Gabe said. "You riding smooth, that's payment enough for me." Shaq saw something rare in this tired, poor man standing in front of him. A kind of pride that money couldn't buy, and money definitely couldn't take away either. He didn't argue further. He simply nodded, shook Gabe's rough hand, and turned to leave. "Same time next week, for a checkup on that knee?" Gabe asked, almost shy about offering it. "Wouldn't miss it," Shaq said, smiling for the first time all day. But before walking out the door, he quietly slid a $100 bill under the wrench on the workbench. 1 week later, Shaq pedaled his new steel bike back down Front Street, feeling lighter than he had in years. His knee had already started feeling better, the swelling slowly going down day by day. He wanted to thank Gabe properly this time. Maybe take him out for a real, hot dinner. But when he pushed open the shop door, something felt completely wrong right away. The shop was empty, dark, silent, except for the faint sound of traffic outside. The tires that once hung along the walls were gone, leaving only nail holes behind. Oil stains still marked the concrete floor, but every tool, every bike, every part had vanished. Even the old faded photograph near the register was gone, leaving just a small square of unfaded paint. Gabe sat alone on the one wooden crate still left in the corner of the room. He was slowly packing his last few wrenches into a torn, sagging cardboard box. "I couldn't make the new rent," Gabe said flatly, not even looking up from his packing. "Croft sent the eviction papers 2 days ago. They're sealing this place up tomorrow morning." His bank account, he admitted quietly, had just $18.42 left after his last medical payment. "Where will you go?" Shaq asked, his voice low. Gabe shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Haven't figured that part out yet." "Family around here?" Shaq asked gently. "Just me," Gabe said. "Been just me for a long while now." Shaq stood in the doorway, saying nothing for a long moment, feeling something tighten hard in his chest. The next morning, Marcus Croft showed up outside the shop, with 2 large security guards beside him. They came to take Gabe's last few tools, calling it compensation for cleanup costs, in a flat, official voice. Croft stood with his arms crossed tightly, reciting cold rules from a printed page in his hand. Gabe stood quietly off to the side, watching strangers carry away the last pieces of his life's work. Then the shop door swung open hard, letting bright morning light spill across the floor. Shaq stepped inside, blocking out most of that light like a dark, silent mountain. Croft turned, and for the first time, he had absolutely nothing polite left to say. Without raising his voice even slightly, Shaq set a thick legal folder down on the dusty workbench. His team of lawyers had pulled it together overnight, working straight through, until early morning. The papers showed clear proof that Croft's building violated Philadelphia's historic preservation laws. There was also documented proof of tax fraud connected to records going back to 2021. Croft reached for the folder, flipping through the pages, his face slowly losing its color. Where did you even get this? He stammered, the calm tone finally cracking. Good lawyers, Shaq said simply. And a lot of money. Both work fast when you need them to. The two security guards exchanged a nervous glance, then quietly stepped back toward the door. Croft's mouth opened, then closed again, no words coming out at all. Shaq looked Croft straight in the eye, his voice staying calm, low, and completely steady throughout. Mr. Croft, you have two simple choices here today, Shaq said, tapping one finger on the folder. Sign these papers now, canceling every dollar of Gabe's remaining debt, and return everything your men took. Or tomorrow morning, your company faces a $5 million federal lawsuit, fully funded by me personally. Croft's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the pen Shaq held out toward him. He signed the release papers quickly, his signature shaky and uneven across the bottom line. His face had gone pale, all the smooth confidence from earlier completely drained out of it. Without another word, he turned and left fast, his security guards trailing close behind him. Gabe stood frozen for a moment, staring at the signed papers like he couldn't quite believe them. Why? He finally asked, his voice cracking just slightly. You barely know me. Shaq shrugged one massive shoulder. You fixed something nobody else could fix. Felt right to return the favor. Gabe looked down at the signed papers again, then back up at Shaq, blinking hard. For a moment, he looked like he might cry, though he fought hard against it. Most folks forget the little guy once they get what they need, Gabe said quietly. I'm not most folks, Shaq said simply, picking up the steel bike from where it leaned against the wall. 2 months passed quietly, after that strange, chaotic morning on Front Street. Inside Shaq's high-end gym in central Philadelphia, something new and unexpected had opened its doors. A small bike shop, still proudly called Vance's Spoke and Chain, sat right beside the front entrance. Warm red brick walls gave the little space a cozy, vintage feeling, unlike the rest of the modern gym. Gabe no longer worried about overdue medical bills or rising rent he couldn't afford. Instead, he spent his days keeping every spin bike in the gym running smooth and steady. It was steady work, honest work, the kind of work that gave a tired man his dignity back. He even had his own small office in the back, with a worn leather chair and a space heater for winter. It wasn't fancy, but it was his, and nobody could take it away, with a blue envelope this time. Members of the gym started recognizing him, nodding hello as they walked past his little workbench each morning. A few of them even brought their own old bikes in, just to hear his stories while he worked. Gabe never talked about the eviction, or Croft, or the day everything almost fell apart. He just kept fixing things, one wheel and one chain at a time, like he always had. It was a sunny Saturday morning, light pouring gently through the front windows of the gym. 5 or 6 kids from the old Kensington block crowded eagerly around Gabe's workbench. Their eyes went wide, watching him patch up a bike tire with steady, practiced hands. You hold the patch right here, Gabe told one small boy, guiding his fingers gently over the rubber. The boy grinned, proud of himself, pressing down carefully just like Gabe had shown him. Another kid asked how long it took to learn all this, and Gabe just laughed, a warm, easy sound. Longer than you've been alive, probably, he told her. But you'll get there faster than I did. Shaq stood off to the side, leaning quietly against his old gray steel bike near the doorway. A small, peaceful smile crossed his face as he watched the scene unfold in front of him. His knee no longer hurt at all, not even after a full, busy day on his feet. And somewhere deep inside, after all those loud years under bright stadium lights, his heart finally felt quiet too. He thought about the old version of himself, alone in that big silent house, rubbing pain into his knee. That man felt far away now, almost like someone he used to know a long time ago. Real peace, it turned out, wasn't found in trophies or rings locked behind glass. It was found in a rundown shop on Front Street, in a tired man's steady, patient hands. It was found right here, on a sunny Saturday morning, surrounded by kids learning something useful. One of the kids looked up at Shaq and asked, "Mister, did you used to play basketball or something?" Shaq just smiled and shook his head. "Nah, kid. I just ride bikes now." Gabe caught his eye from across the room and gave a small, knowing nod. Shaq glanced once more at Gabe, then climbed onto his old steel bike and rode a slow, easy circle. The wheels turned smooth beneath him, just like they had that very first evening on Front Street. Some debts, he realized, could never be paid back with money alone. This one had been paid back with patience, with trust, and with one quiet act of kindness. And for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough. Outside the gym windows, the Philadelphia morning rolled on, loud and busy, like it always did. But inside that little shop, time seemed to slow down, just for a while, just enough to matter. Two men, once strangers, had built something together that no amount of money could ever explain. A bike, a friendship, a second chance, for both of them, found in the most unlikely place. Sometimes the biggest changes in a life start with the smallest, most ordinary questions. A question like the one Gabe had asked that very first afternoon, plain and honest as ever. You need a bike for riding or for healing? Turns out, for both of them, the answer had been healing all along. Not just a knee, not just a shop on a forgotten street in Kensington. Two tired men, from two completely different worlds, had quietly fixed something in each other instead. And maybe that was the whole point of it, the part no doctor or lawyer could ever explain. Some repairs happen in a workshop. Others happen somewhere much deeper when nobody else is even watching. A torch, a steady hand, and a little bit of trust. Sometimes that's really all it takes. Front Street kept rolling on. After that, same trains, same brick walls, same tired morning crowds. But inside one small shop, now living inside a gym, something quiet and good kept going too. And that, in the end, was worth more than any ring locked behind any piece of glass. It was worth more than any cheering crowd, any flashing camera, any headline ever printed about him. It was just a man, a bike, and a quiet Saturday morning that finally felt like home. That was the whole story, really. No tricks, no spotlight, just two tired men helping each other heal.